All right, so when I say the word tank, you're probably picturing this massive metal beast, right? Rumbling across some modern battlefield. But what if I told you its great-great-grandfather was basically a wooden cart? A cart pulled by horses that absolutely dominated warfare 500 years before the first real tank ever rolled out. Well, today, we're talking about the war wagon.
For centuries, this was the ultimate military puzzle. I mean, think about it. You're on an open field, and an army of infantry has almost zero chance against the thunderous charge of heavy cavalry. Knights were the apex predators of the medieval battlefield. So how in the world do you stop something that's basically unstoppable? Well, you get creative. You get really creative. You don't just build a fortress and hope they don't go around it. You put that fortress on wheels. And that was the war wagon, a truly ingenious solution that took a simple farm cart and turned it into a revolutionary weapon of war.
So what was this thing, really? To get why it was so brilliant, we've got to break down the basic idea behind this mobile fortress.
At its core, the definition is pretty simple. You take a wagon, you arm it, you armor it up, and boom, you've got an early fighting vehicle. But this simple, almost obvious idea would end up having some incredibly complex and powerful uses on the battlefield.
Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking this whole fortress on wheels thing was a purely European idea, born out of medieval necessity. But the blueprint for it, it's much, much older. In fact, to find its real origin story, we've got to go back 1,500 years earlier and thousands of miles to the east.
That's right, this concept is ancient, with roots that stretch all the way back to China. The first recorded use we know of comes from way back in 1119 BC in ancient China. So picture this. During the Battle of Mobei, a Han general named Wei Qing is facing total disaster. His army is about to be just swallowed up by the legendary Xiongnu cavalry. Thinking fast, he orders his supply wagons, what they called military sturdy wagons, into a defensive ring. And just like that, he creates an instant fortress on the open plains, completely neutralizing that cavalry charge and giving his crossbowmen the protected platform they needed to win the day. And just look at this timeline. It's kind of staggering. Over 1,500 years passed between that first use in China and when it was perfected in medieval Europe. Then it's another 500 years before we get the first modern tank. This really drives home that this isn't some new idea, it's an ancient one, just rediscovered and perfected.
Okay, so let's jump forward over 1,500 years to 15th century Bohemia, because this is where that ancient blueprint wasn't just copied, it was supercharged. It was perfected by a peasant rebellion and turned into a legendary, war-winning machine.
The Hussites were mostly peasant infantry, and their enemies? The Knights of the Holy Roman Empire. These weren't just soldiers. They were the foundation of the feudal power structure. We're talking heavily armored, professional, and seemingly invincible warriors. On paper, it was a complete and utter mismatch.
But the Hussites had a brilliant and incredibly innovative general named Jan Žižka. He knew his peasant army could never beat the knights in a straight-up fight, so he didn't play their game. He took that ancient Chinese tactic and turned the humble wagon into a straight-up knight killer.
So the ultimate test for this wild new system came in 1420 at the Battle of Sudomir. This was it. This was the moment of truth. Would these rolling fortresses actually work against a full-scale, honest-to-God cavalry charge?
And the odds were, well, they were staggering. You've got just 400 Hussites facing off against 2,000 Imperial Knights. That's 5 heavily armored professionals for every single peasant soldier. They were surrounded and, by all accounts, hopelessly outnumbered.
And they won. The war wagon worked. Against all odds, this mobile fortress let a peasant army completely defeat a force of elite knights 5 times its size. This sent shockwaves across the entire military world. A weapon built from farm carts had just defeated the aristocracy on the battlefield. The rules of war were literally changing.
So how did they do it? I mean, really, how does a wooden wagon stop a dude and a half-ton of steel and horse flesh charging right at you? Well, let's pop the hood and look at the anatomy of this thing.
Okay, so each wagon was like a perfectly designed mini fortress. It started with a heavy, reinforced base, for stability. Then you had high wooden sides for cover, but they were pierced with firing slits, so crossbowmen and handgunners could fire from safety. A lot of them even had a small cannon for extra punch. And all around the wagon, you had infantry with long pikes, creating this bristling hedge of steel to stop any knight who actually managed to get close.
And this comparison just illustrates it perfectly. On the one hand, you see the medieval drawing absolutely packed with firepower, and on the other, a modern reconstruction, which really shows you just how solid and imposing these things were.
They weren't just flimsy carts, they were platforms for projecting power while keeping your soldiers safe. The tactic itself, which they called the Wagon Fort, was a 4-step masterpiece of defense. Step 1. Form a circle and literally chain the wagons together. Step 2. Let the enemy knights charge and break themselves against your unbreakable wall. Step 3. Unleash absolute hell with crossbows, handguns, and cannons from your protected positions. And finally, Step 4. Once the enemy is confused and disorganized, your infantry charge out of the fort to finish them off. Brilliant.
And for over a century, this tactic was almost unbeatable. The war wagon completely changed the rules of European warfare. But you know how it goes. Technology never stops moving, and every dominant weapon eventually meets its match.
The problem wasn't a better knight or a stronger horse. Nope. The threat came from a distance. It was the sound of thunder on the battlefield. And it was the rise of effective mobile field artillery.
And here we see the incredible irony of the war wagon. Its greatest strength, being a solid, immovable wall that could stop a cavalry charge dead in its tracks, was also its fatal flaw. This big, stationary wooden target was tragically vulnerable to cannon fire. Field artillery could just sit back way out of range and smash the wagon fort to splinters before the knights even had to lift a finger.
The beginning of the end really came in 1504. At the Battle of Winsenbach, a force of German mercenaries used their cannons and muskets to systematically break a wagon wall from a distance. And just like that, the magic was gone. The unbeatable weapon had finally been beaten.
But, the story doesn't really end there. While the wooden wagon vanished from the battlefield, its core idea, a vehicle that combines firepower, protection, and mobility all in one package, that never went away. That fundamental concept just evolved, eventually leading directly to the armored cars, the APCs, and, the tanks that define modern land warfare.
So it really leaves us with a fascinating thought, doesn't it? The war wagon went from revolutionary to obsolete because of a single technological shift. And it just makes you wonder, what seemingly unbeatable technology that we rely on today is just waiting for its own version of the cannon to come along and change the rules of the game all over again?